Welcome to the Heart of Healthcare podcast. I'm Hallie Tecco.
I'm Michael Esquivel.
And I'm Steve Krause. And every Monday, we bring you the latest in healthcare innovation as we sit down with entrepreneurs and industry experts.
So buckle up and join us as we figure out how to improve healthcare for all. Mo, you are only the second person, along with Dan Diamond, who's been on this show more than once. So welcome back to the Heart of Healthcare.
What a huge honor. What's the old saying about movies? Like the sequel's never as good as the original, Hallie. So like we'll try and make this Godfather too. Yeah.
We will. Yes, we'll do our best. So let's just dive right in. I mean, you started at NEA as a unpaid intern in 2000. So if my math is right, 25 years ago.
That is a quarter century, if you want to make it sound like really old.
Tell us about that trajectory from being an unpaid intern to now co-CEO of one of the largest, most influential healthcare funds.
The secret is I would have continued to do it unpaid for a very long time. And don't tell anyone, I'd probably do it unpaid today because like, I just happen to think it's the best job, coolest job in the world. But like, you have these amazing entrepreneurs on your podcast all the time, and they talk about kind of the fortuitousness and the randomness in how they start these companies or fall into these, kind of careers in healthcare. And I feel like I'm a little bit in a similar bucket because, I just kind of totally lucked my way into an internship 25 years ago, listening to one of NEA's co-founders, Chuck Newhall, speak on campus at Wharton, where I was going to school. And I just thought that was the coolest thing, what he was talking about. By the way, this is in 1999 at the time. So talking about venture capital and healthcare and technology. And I thought like, well, that would be fun. And I basically, conned my way into working for him. People, Hallie, say, I carried so-and-so's bags, and they usually mean it in a bit of a metaphorical sense, like an allegorical way. Like I literally carried Chuck Newhall's bags, and I loved it. And I loved every minute of it. It was this old, rich British banker leather briefcase. And I would go with him to board meetings and kind of learn the business firsthand for a summer. And
did he hand it down to you? Do you have this briefcase now?
I do not, I'm sure it's somewhere. Chuck is retired living in suburban Baltimore. And I'm sure that briefcase is encased in glass somewhere in his wonderful home. But there's an old saying that this business, like a lot of them, medicine, great example, is an apprentice business, right? What's that old line? See one, do one, teach one, about interns and residents in training. And so I felt like I got that beneficial mentorship from him and from the NEA team 25 years ago.
Well, and you must have carried the bags well because they did hire you and you stayed on. Now, you didn't study healthcare. You kind of learned it at NEA.
Well, by the way, like I wanted to stay on. So I finished my summer internship and I had a lunch with Chuck and I was like, hey, I'd like to do this for a living. Let's make that happen. And he laughed and he's like, okay, well, like this is what you need to do. You need to go do 2 years of investment banking, 2 years of private equity, 2 years of an MBA program, and then like maybe NEA or some other firm can hire you back.
Yeah.
And so I dutifully went off and did that. I checked I went to DLJ and UBS and Summit Partners. And then I was about to start at GSB here.
And you came back begging.
At Stanford. and NEA called in 2005 and said, hey, they just raised their first $1 billion fund at the time. And they said, we're experimenting with this thing called associates. Do you want to come back and be an associate? And it was a 1-year commitment. It was a pay cut to what I was making at Summit Partners, and I had to forego my spot at Stanford. And at the time, Stanford would not let you defer, right? That's now a common thing now. Yeah. And so I lost my spot at Stanford. I lost my housing deposit. My parents cried for weeks because they thought I was throwing my life away for like a 1-year opportunity. And that was.
But you already disappointed them by not being a doctor. You came from a family of doctors. So like you were already a disappointment. Why not just throw away your GSB opportunity?
Out of the gates. And let me just make it worse for you. I have 2 sisters who are doctors. So it's like parents who are doctors, sisters who are doctors, and then this like proverbial black sheep. Yes, it was, but coming from a healthcare family was fascinating too, because like I got this appreciation, and this is in the 80s and 90s, and this is, really at the advent of this thing called HMOs, which really didn't exist in the 80s. And as we made that transition into the BBA and Hillary Care in the early 90s, really the advent of the HMO. And so kind of seeing that landscape change from, I had two parents who were employed physicians at Johns Hopkins, right? And that was a fascinating experience.
Yeah. Okay, so the advice that you had was you need to go work in investment banking, get your MBA, and then come back and become an associate. That is very different today. I feel like today it would be like, go start a company, sell that company, and then come into VC. Like, what is the advice that you give to folks who want to break into VC today?
Well, I tell them not to, is the advice, honestly, that I give them. I tell them to go do something else. And I mean that like sincerely and earnestly. I don't think the world needs any more venture capitalists, all due respect to me and to other fabulous venture capitalists. Like, I think the reality is that, first of all, I think there's a lot of ways if you really do want to get into the buy side of healthcare innovation on the investing side. We have a very diverse set of team members who I would say, Hallie, are kind of like the old, like a third rule. A third come from investing backgrounds like I did. A third come from deep technical backgrounds, MD, PhD, and then a third come from deep operational entrepreneurial backgrounds, right? And obviously there's a lot of overlap between those, amongst those buckets. But so I don't think there's any one way to quote unquote break into venture. I think you can do it in it from a handful of different vectors. Yeah. But I also think that like what the world needs candidly are far more entrepreneurs, far more people ideating new kind of ways to deliver better quality care or better quality therapeutics or better quality devices. And I think the ecosystem to fund those ideas is actually really strong and richer in talent and diversity than it's ever been in my career.
But are you just saying that because you don't want more VC competitors so that you can win all the deals?
No, well, I mean, you could interpret it that way, but no, I mean, the honest truth, by the way, like, you know, like the ecosystem benefits from talented, strong investors and firms, right? I've been here for a quarter century, as you were kind enough to remind me, but our firm's been around for 48 years. And we've never taken a company from ideation to exit by ourselves as the only investor, ever. Yeah. So like this whole idea of innovating around healthcare and like building companies is not a solo sport. Yeah. Right? Like private equity can be a solo sport. Yep. It's a zero-sum game. You win the deal, you lose the deal. That is not venture. So no, I think that like the system benefits from...
I do feel like VCs are somewhat collaborative. There's like cliques within it. There are VCs that like to work together, and then
it's a little bit like high school.
Compete. A little bit like high school. Yeah. Okay, but being a VC, I think everyone would agree, is infinitely easier than being a founder. I know we need more founders, but like being able to be that coach on the sidelines supporting the entrepreneur is just easier. And it's really fun because you get to see all the companies. You kind of have this bird's eye view of what's happening in the space.
I don't know that it's infinitely easier. I think at times it can be. I think it's all hard. I think it's all different degrees of hard. Honestly, like being a founder has its own set of challenges and rewards, right? In the same way that being an early stage investor or a growth stage investor or a late stage investor or a public company CEO, I think it's all degrees and gradients. And like, I think there are investors who take the job in a very casual way, right? Like, as there are probably founders.
They make it look like they take the entire month of August off. They make it look real easy. And
Hallie, you and I know we're on a board together, so you know that for August collective health board meetings.
Yeah. Were you there? Okay,
I was there. Yeah. No, but I think it's obviously there are great entrepreneurs who become, investors and great investors who become entrepreneurs. And I think
less
it's
often
fluid.
though. That direction doesn't happen as much. Usually
investor to entrepreneur.
It usually goes operator to investor. You don't see it as much going the other direction. I'm sure it does happen. But okay, so in the last 25 years, what has been kind of the biggest change in venture capital? And are the changes more like cyclical, market-driven, economy-driven, or have there been like fundamental structural shifts in how VC operates, or both?
It's a great question. Like, I would take it in two parts, Hallie. I would say like the venture capital industry as a whole over the last quarter century has gone from infancy to teenage years and not adulthood, right? But, the venture industry has gone from a cottage industry. I mean, Chuck Newhall, my mentor, traces his roots back to the very early days of venture working for the Rockefeller family, right? And, one of our co-founders, Dick Kramlich, started his career working for Arthur Rock. And that was not that long ago. That was the 1970s, right? So our industry is still a young industry. And so I think if you look at where the industry exists today, it's been professionalized in a sense that we now have some very large asset managers who are investing across stage, across sector, across geography in a way that probably didn't exist 25 years ago. And so I think in that sense, you can probably plot a chart, a scattergram, and say that venture is kind of following a curve of private equity in terms of, or growth equity in terms of how that industry matured and evolved and how a handful of firms became very large, sophisticated, high-performing asset managers. I think in healthcare specifically, it's become, there used to be a saying when I started that healthcare was the trailer park of venture investing, right? Like everyone, and remember, I started my career in the internet bubble. So there was a feeling in 1999 and 2000 that healthcare would no longer exist as a viable asset class inside of venture capital. And what you had, I'm sitting here in Sand Hill Road right now, it's up and down Sand Hill Road behind me, firms were jettisoning their healthcare practices in 98 and 99, right? Yeah. And ever since then, you've had this...
For years afterwards, though.
You've had this cycle, absolutely. We call it like the healthcare hokey pokey, where it's like, 1 foot in, and then 1 foot out, and then it's a good regulatory environment, let me get back in, and then, and so, by the way, one of the things that I'm proudest of is that NEA has been the most consistent, durable healthcare investor inside of a multi-stage, multi-strat firm, right? And we've been consistently investing in healthcare for now 5 decades. And so I think there's real benefit from that durability and consistency. But I do think now, Hallie, I'd like to think, and I believe this sincerely, healthcare has crossed the transom from that, is that a viable asset class to invest in to generate venture returns? And we are now, healthcare is now a fundamental core tenet of the venture ecosystem, alongside enterprise, alongside fintech, alongside consumer e-commerce and whatever else you want to put in there.
Yeah. But do you think that generalists, like individuals, not firms, because NEA does tech and healthcare, but generalist firms that don't have healthcare specialists on the team, do you think they can succeed investing in healthcare?
Can generalists succeed investing in healthcare? Or
do you have to have healthcare experts on the team?
The answer is, of course, absolutely, they can. Absolutely. There is no, it's one of these interesting things. A generalist person cannot succeed performing orthopedic surgeries, but a generalist person can succeed investing in orthopedics companies, right? I think that now I would argue that whether you're an enterprise software investor or a defense tech investor or a financial services investor, that there is deep benefit that is conferred by domain expertise and kind of knowledge of that category. And in healthcare, there are so many codified challenges around, reimbursement and regulatory overhang and, obviously technical and scientific rigor. But the answer is, of course, there are plenty of phenomenal healthcare companies that have been built with generalist investors on the cap table. I would probably argue, though, that at some point those companies tapped sophisticated capital partners that had deep domain expertise, right?
Well, we know that, there's pretty good evidence that having domain expertise increases your chances of success in any industry, including healthcare. Healthcare especially, and especially if you're a B2B company where your network, your reputation matters quite a bit. So that's why I was wondering, how much does it matter for the VC? I guess if the company is going to succeed anyways, where their capital comes from might not influence if they succeed or not. But in terms of picking winners, you would think that an investor with a deeper healthcare background could spot flaws in business plans maybe better.
Yeah, I think that's right. And this is kind of goes back to your to the prior topic that you kind of raised, which is kind of about involvement and challenges to kind of the job, because there's the picking of companies, right? And then there's what we call active management of those companies. And like, I think if you're a seed investor or an angel investor or a very small Series A, Series B, the picking is the only relevant thing that you are doing because you're a small light item in a cap table and you're really not expected to get engaged or involved, right? It's a little different for us. Like we're almost always the largest investor in every single company that we invest in.
Yeah.
You know, we average almost 2 board seats per company. So we are quite active in how we try and influence, help guide those businesses. So yes, the stock picking, quote unquote, company picking is important, but candidly, it's almost equally important in terms of like the value that you contribute and add and the direction you help those entrepreneurs take. Because fundamentally, like that oftentimes is the difference between a great outcome and a bad outcome.
Yep. What has been your biggest regret or mistake in the time that you've been investing in healthcare?
I mean, like, I don't know how you choose one because, like, as you can imagine, after 25 years, I've made a lot of them. So there's this saying that, Hallie, that like, you know, I tell my team and I tell the founders and CEOs that I'm privileged enough to work with, which is like, I only want people to make original mistakes. Like making repetitive mistakes is a horrible feeling because you're literally sitting there saying, I've made this mistake before and here I am making it again. In terms of original mistakes, and I've made a lot over the course of a quarter century, I think the hardest thing in this business, candidly, is timing of exit. And I've made plenty of mistakes in terms of like getting off a train too early. And that's a horrible feeling, right? I mean, it's great in the sense that usually when you're doing that, it's still a good outcome in the moment. In retrospect, it doesn't feel great, right? So like, I remember we built a business called CHG. It was actually called Comp Health Staffing. I'm going to date myself. We spun it out of a large public company in 2002. It was the very first locum tenens business. So physician staffing, right? Temp staffing, flex staffing. And we sold it in 2006 for a phenomenal outcome, like double-digit return on a large check. And Mike Weinholz was the CEO. Company was based in Salt Lake City. And in the 15 years from that point, the company just took off. Like created an enormous amount of value. It's a phenomenal company. Scott Beck, who was then the chief growth officer, is now the CEO. And it's gone on to kind of like dominate in a really positive way, the locum space, right? So again, like that's, by the way, you know, we exited a company called Bravo Health in the MA space, you know, in 2011 for a wonderful outcome. We sold it to HealthSpring and Herb's, you know, amazing business. And at a time when we thought there would be some regulatory overhang from pending ACA reform. And guess what? It turned out MA profitability 5x under President Obama, right? So like there are good lessons there, Hallie, in terms of, you know, kind of particularly for those two instances, you know, when you have phenomenal teams, we tend to index more on the team and the business model than on the macro environment feeling right for an exit.
You've avoided, so far, fingers crossed, all the big scandals in healthcare. You've avoided Theranos, Ubiome, you've Cerebral, there have been a number of very high profile implosions. But what is like your formula for avoiding these huge disasters? How do you see these red flags? Or have you just been lucky?
Yes, is the answer. I mean, look, like I think that what we know about healthcare is that it's a highly regulated industry, and I believe that there is real value and necessity in having healthcare continue to be a highly regulated industry, right? You're talking about a patient's health. You're talking about them accessing the healthcare system when they are at their most vulnerable on behalf of themselves or advocating for a loved one, whether it's in a clinical trial, whether it's to get a diagnostic or a therapeutic, or whether it's to walking into a clinic or a care setting to receive care, right? So it's great to be on the innovation side of healthcare. I love it. I would so much rather be doing, Hallie, what you're doing and I'm doing than just moving numbers around on a spreadsheet and saying like, can we buy a company? Can we reduce its G&A by 5 basis points? Can we lever it? Can we sell it? You know, like, I mean, all due respect, a lot of smart people are in that financial engineering world, right? But, you know, I think for what we're doing, there's always going to be an element of business model innovation that you need to quote unquote underwrite, right?
Okay.
But it also doesn't mean that you need to do that at the kind of detriment of patient care, of compliance, of oversight, of kind of regulatory performance. But I mean, look, I think that at the end of the day, healthcare still needs to be pushed from an innovation perspective, right? I mean, there are some hyper scaled companies, okay, that have their own regulatory challenges, right? I mean, it's been in the news of late with DOJ investigations and like, so I don't think that even the scaled mega players are immune from, you know, kind of regulatory missteps. Yeah,
that's true. I wonder if, you know, you talked earlier about, you know, not just picking winners, but also actively managing them. And in this way, it's like, not only do you have to avoid picking losers, but you have to, when you do choose a company, kind of actively manage and not pressure them to focus so much on the top line that they cut corners to get there. And I do wonder how much of it is founders that were put in very high stress situations by their investors who perhaps didn't understand that healthcare works on its own timelines.
No, it's a fabulous point, right? Like you and I are involved in a company, Collective Health, where that team, who I love, Ali Diab, and they've been at it for more than a decade, right? So like I like to say that healthcare is not an overnight business. It's the opposite of overnight, right? Like typically the best companies evolve over over a very long period of time, right? So, you know, we're fortunate to be investing out of a platform that has an incredibly long hold period. Our average hold period per company is 9.5 years.
Wow.
And that's the average.
Yeah.
So like we have an incredibly durable time horizon in which we have no pressure to monetize any of our positions, which allows us to say, great, how do we build the best company for 10 years from now, 12 years from now?
Yeah.
Like I care less, meaning not at all, about like how do we get some massive markup on the next financing.
Yeah.
That's relevant when you're a small fund and you don't have capital to continue to invest, right?
Yeah.
It's less of an issue, fortunately.
Yeah, I mean, you invest so early, but you also have the growth fund. So you're kind of seeing and shepherding these companies through all the stages. Now, I imagine one challenge is that's a very long cycle, like for feedback. And so like, what are the things like going on in between that 9.5 years where you're like, okay, I still feel good about this. Like, where like how do you go back to your LPs and you're like, hold on, I'm going to get your money back, but you have to wait a little bit longer.
Well, no, it's a great point. I mean, fortunately, we're so fortunate to have limited partners who understand kind of how we're architecting and building these companies and kind of engineering these returns. And you know, obviously, you know, by virtue of the fact that we have a portfolio of, you know, nearly 600 companies, Hallie, across tech and healthcare.
Active.
So active.
Wow.
So you know, we now have a flywheel where every year we are distributing and returning capital. And we're fortunate. We always like to say, like, we're returning more capital every year than we're investing, right? That's a good spot to be in.
Very good spot to be in.
But fortunately for us, like when you're building a biopharma company, which we have a phenomenal life sciences practice, it's very much that proverbial, like you're building towards a card flip, right? That could be binary. Fortunately, in healthcare IT, healthcare services, you have very measurable, digestible KPIs along the way, whether it's commercial, whether it's product, whether it's margin or EBITDA, that outcomes that allows you to say, is this company headed in the right direction? Does this company warrant and deserve more capital at higher prices or different terms? Has it graduated from a venture stage business to a growth stage business to a public markets business? And so that's kind of part of the underwrite as those companies mature. And it's, by the way, it's one of the funnest parts of company building to be able to say, I remember that, you know, founder and CEO when we were ideating on a business plan, and now they're managing billions of dollars of revenue,
Yeah.
and they need different things from me, and I need different things from them, and like it's like yeah, Hallie, you've got kids, like it is almost like a like a parent-child relationship. Yeah.
Yes, just as hard. I mean,
Yes.
you love the company building aspects so much that in the last few years you started incubating new companies at NEA, like Strive and Curana and Radiology Partners. This is a completely different model from what you had been used to doing. And as I said earlier, and I stand by, it is so much harder to start a company than back it. So why do you do it?
Hallie, yeah, you are so right. It is. And I will say it's rewarding. So we kind of like, fell into this a little bit, about 14 years ago. So 2010, 2011, it started with a venture partner that I was fortunate enough to add to our team, Rich Whitney, who was the CFO of DaVita. And just a phenomenal operator, phenomenal human being. And we were spending time together ideating on imaging. And if there was an opportunity, by the way, this is like back in the days of teleradiology 2.0. So if you remember, Nighthawk Teleradiology was a business out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, that kind of pioneered this idea of like secondary reads out of India and Australia.
Yeah.
And when I was at Summit Partners, we invested in that business. And then there was a spinoff called Franklin and Seidelman that didn't really work. But we kind of looked at it, Rich and I together, and said like, well, we think there's an opportunity to do something here, but the business model we would build doesn't exist. So we looked at each other and said, great, let's just build it ourselves. And we wrote a business plan. Rich recruited a co-founder, Anthony Gabriel, and that business started out as Radiology Newco and became Radiology Partners. We funded it in 2011. Today, it's the largest imaging company in the world. They employ more radiologists than any business in the world. They have more images than any business in the world. They're more than $3 billion of revenue and doing some really interesting things. By the way, back then, we had this thesis, Hallie, around like machine learning, which of course now we call generative AI, right? So again, it speaks to like the duration of the hold period there. Like we never would have been able to unlock this Gen AI opportunity if we just said, great, we have a 4-year, 5-year hold, it's EBITDA positive, let's monetize this position, right? And so, but that kind of really kicked off in earnest, Hallie, this idea of Newco ideation and company building. And there are some wonderful venture studios in New York and Silicon Valley who do this in a highly repetitive, I mean, not in a bad way, in a highly like, scaled way. Like they do 20 a year and like, we're the opposite. We need crazy high conviction. We need to know that we can devote a lot of resources to it, capital to it. And so we're doing maybe one every 3 years. But when we do one, it's Radiology Partners, it's Strive Health, which is the largest VBC business for kidney care. It's Curana, which is the largest VBC business for seniors living in nursing homes and retirement communities. And now we're doing one in PACE called Habitat Health. And so...
and do you let other investors come in? Or is it just an NEA funded?
Okay, so this goes back to like, you think I'm just trying to crowd out the landscape by telling people not to become venture investors, Hallie. Every one of those companies.
Capitalist is in your title, so.
No, you know what? Yeah, it is. But no, we have wonderful co-investors in every single one of those projects. Alphabet, Town Hall, Whistler. Cool. Yeah. So it's, I don't think that you can Redpoint, you can't build, again, these companies are capital intensive. They require different skill sets and sets of expertise. And like, I don't think that you can build a company in a vacuum, even as a large scaled asset manager.
Yep. So last question, and I'm wondering if you remember this topic from when you were on the podcast the first time. We talked about if digital health was a party right now, like what kind of party would it be?
Across healthcare more broadly, I think that we are in a period of transition from a regulatory perspective, to state the obvious. Yep. I think we're in transition from a spending perspective, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's Medicare, whether it's fee-for-service reimbursement. I think our regulatory agencies are in a pretty enormous period of dislocation. And I think you and I, as seasoned healthcare investors, can look at that and say, well, it reminds us of Medicare MMA or BBA or ACA. And I guess now we're in MAHA. So, but I think that there is precedent for every 8 years, our healthcare industry goes through a period of pretty significant dislocation. I think people, Hallie, you were building Rock Health during the Obama administration.
Yeah.
People
The ACA.
overlook just how big an event the Affordable Care Act was and just how freaked out a lot of investors were in terms of like, yeah, there's going to be tailwinds, but oh my God, it could end certain parts of healthcare.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I don't think, I'm not like particularly doom and gloom about this current cycle that we're in, because I think that as students of healthcare, there's precedent for kind of how this happens over prior political administrations. But I think we're in a period of transition. I think to use your to use your party analogy, like maybe back in college, like we're going from like one party to another. You put your big winter coat on, you're walking across campus from like, one place to another. And like, I don't know what the next party's going to look like, but it's going to be different.
But
and
it's going to be a rager. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's going to be a banger. Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah,
for sure.
I was thinking maybe it's like, you said the 8-year cycle, which I think was really interesting. And so maybe it's like an 8th grade graduation party right now. So we're like, who knows? Like, I don't know if we're going to be going to private high school, public high school, kind of in that like awkward adolescent phase. So I'm going to celebrate. Taylor Swift is on in the background, and we're eating pizza in my basement. And
we're in our Eras tour, Hallie.
Yeah, exactly. So
well, I think Hallie, that, and this is the beauty of like, you are a dedicated, like long-term healthcare investor. And again, I think this speaks to, if you have the benefit of time and duration, and you're investing in companies that have high quality business models that are driving positive outcomes, right? Whether they're health outcomes, saving outcomes, or access outcomes, right? And hopefully more than one of those vectors. Then over time, you should be able to generate, impact and value. Now, if you get caught in a cycle where you're forced to monetize it early, or you get into a capital crunch and then you could get caught in a bad spot. But I think that all these businesses that are driving real value from a VBC perspective or a digital health perspective will end up being just fine in the long run.
And far more agile than the incumbents, right? If anybody can withstand whatever's coming for us, it's going to be the founders.
You would think so, and look, and I think that again, just to tie it full circle, I think that far more of those incumbents will be acquiring those businesses than public market investors.
Okay, more M&A. Well, we need that. Well, Mo, thank you so much for being here. It was fun chatting with you.
Amazing. Thank you, Hallie.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Healthcare. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please leave a rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe. The Heart of Healthcare is produced by Hallie Tecco and hosted by Michael Esquivel, Steve Krause, and Hallie Tecco. The show is engineered, edited, and mixed by Kyle Moore. Visit our website, heartofhealthcarepodcast.com, for show notes and details.
Find yourself looking for a new job or change in career? Monster.com is here to help. We are not only here to bring you job postings, but also AI interview prep and salary tools, expert career advice, and top-notch resume services. We've got everything you need to land your perfect job fit. Discover the magic of finding the ideal job with Monster.com. Your future starts now. Visit Monster.com today. Your next job opportunity is just a click away.